Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. Tonight is a show all about podcasting and new media for creatives. I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles. But before we start diving into all the fun tonight, let's make our way around the room and see who has decided to join us. So, Ian, you're up first.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Ian J. Malone, author of the Mako Saga, the Swamp Eagle Security Trilogy over in the Four Horsemen universe. Lots of sci-fi stuff, essentially. I'm also host and lead producer for the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast, and I am ecstatic to be here. So thanks for having me.
Josh?
My name is Josh Pantalleresco. I write stuff in podcasts too. My current podcast is just Joshing. They talk about life, the universe, and everything with creatives from all over the spectrum. And my latest release is Alice 1, which is a mashup of Alice in Wonderland and Greek mythology. Alice is Pandora, so it's kind of a fun. So that's my latest release. My next one is I'm actually writing and drawing it. It's called Lights Out.
Marx?
Very nice.
Yeah, Marx Pyle. I'm a filmmaker, author, have a series out currently called Obsidian Monsters and an anthology called Dragons of a Different Tale that I co-edited. And relevant to this, I'm a co-host of a podcast called Genretainment. And you also may occasionally see me on YouTube on DC Action Hour, talking about the Arrowverse or on Urban Fantasy, Dragon Con Urban Fantasy track YouTube channel, the Supernatural Rewind, where we watch Supernatural every season. Like every month we cover one season each month and talk about it. So
I'm so in on that one.
Tonia, and you haven't been on the Supernatural track, haven't you, over here?
No, I haven't.
You're missing out.
Oh, you're talking. Yeah. I saw that it was on the list, but the con times conflicted with other stuff that I had, and I was like, no, I'm so sad. Anyway, I'll introduce myself. I'm Tonia Ransom. I'm the creator and executive producer of Nightlight, a horror podcast that features creepy tales written by Black writers from all over the world. I'm also working on a second audio drama that is Lovecraft Country meets True Blood that I'm super, super excited about. I'm an author. I have a book out called Risen, and I'm also an aspiring screenwriter. I've got a few scripts out there that people seem to like, so hopefully one day someone will buy one of them.
And Landis.
Yeah, I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I turned podcaster, turned author, or I don't know which way I turned, but anyway, I'm not practicing law anymore. I have written some lighthearted legal thrillers. I've written a series that's called the Christmas Courtroom Trilogy, kind of a mix between My Cousin Vinny and Miracle on 34th Street. My latest is called Deadly Declaration. It's also a legal thriller set in the modern day in a retirement community, but it harkens back to a historical mystery involving Charlotte Mecklenburg and the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. And in the podcasting world, I do Charlotte Reader's Podcast, coming up on 300 episodes. All genres, seems like all the time, but a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot doing it.
So I know for me, I kind of got started into media by accident. I started out in print media and did some radio. I wound up somehow or another, did a little bit of TV and stuff at one point. But, from a podcasting standpoint and audio, I actually started playing with it probably 20 years ago, even before it was podcasting. I mean, it was even before you had iTunes and some of these things, before you really had that name, and we were doing some audiophile type stuff, different things. So I wanted to kind of go around. How did you guys get involved, get started in it? What was your first experience, and why did you think it was a good idea to continue? So, Ian, how about you?
Well, long story short, I'm an old radio guy. I knew in high school and through college, by gum, I'm going to be a radio DJ. That's what I'm going to do. And if you look at the state of that industry these days, kind of dodged a bullet there. So, fast forward a number of years, and I got into the writing thing and put out a book, and then put out another book, and then had a trilogy, and then had two trilogies, the writer's path. And along the way, you start hearing phrases, if you're an author, particularly if you're an indie author, like authorpreneur and entrepreneur and your author brand and author platforms. And there's all kinds of ways to talk about your books, essentially. And I had an itch to do something with audio again. I missed it. Being on the air was a blast in radio, but as much or more fun was the production end of things, getting into a prod studio and playing with tracks and mixing volumes and mixing, sound drops and movie drops. And that's a fun process to me, taking all those components and mixing them down into this creation. And unlike a novel that takes you, anywhere from 3 to 9 months and a year, depending on how prolific you are, podcast was something I could bang out, and do them weekly or biweekly or monthly, whatever we chose to be. And so once we kind of narrowed down what we wanted the show to be, we knew what our audience was, we knew kind of what we wanted to take to them in terms of content, we started to put one together, and we've been doing it ever since. And that's the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast. So it started not quite 2 years ago. We're up to about 50 episodes and rolling along swimmingly.
How about you, Josh?
Completely by accident. So so I've been interviewing people for about 20 years. So I had gotten to the point where I finally bought like a cell phone like 2015, and I had the opportunity to interview Robert J. Sawyer, which is a kind of really cool thing. So we go to a conference room and I'm recording it on my phone. And I'll never forget, this changed my life. We come out of the conference. I forget who we talked to. They asked him, "What were you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I was just recording an interview with Josh for his podcast." I didn't have a podcast at that moment in time. It's like, wait up. And something just clicked in my head. Like, legitimately just clicked in my head. Could I do a podcast? Yes. Should I do a podcast? Well, I 700 and some odd episodes later, I've been doing it. The thing is, like I have a big mouth. I'm really good with interviewing people. I enjoy the ability to meet and interact with other people, and I love interviews. So it's a natural platform for me to get into. But that was not the plan at all. It just was a complete and total accident. But I'm good with that.
Some of the best things are accidents, though, I think.
My entire career is an accident. But that's another podcast.
Well, everything we're doing here was a semi-intentional accident, but we might talk about that. How about you, Marx?
I was trying to think about that. When I was in film school, I was trying to look for different things to do. And I started writing articles for a website called Sci-Fi Portal back then, before Sci-Fi Channel bought the rights to Siffy spelling. And they had a podcast, and I got asked to co-host it a few times, and that went really well, and I really enjoyed it. And I asked Julie if she wanted to co-host a podcast with me, and we started doing that on Blog Talk Radio, and then we eventually morphed into like more traditional recorded podcast. And I just really enjoyed it. I think I just, as someone who wants to be a creator, I'm always fascinated about what other creators, how they approach creating and work. And so I just love like interviewing different creators, and it's really helped me out a lot, grow as a creator, and also make a lot of new friends too.
How about you, Tonia?
Oh, I first wanted to start a podcast before podcasts were even a thing. So pre-podcast, but after internet radio, they did these old time radio shows that you could listen to via like iTunes or whatever. And I'm one of those people, like, I can't listen to music when I work, and I was a web developer at the time. So like I needed something to, shut out everything that was going on around me so I could concentrate. And I kind of stumbled on old time radio, and I thought, this is great. Like, why aren't we doing this anymore? This is so cool. And thought, like, I really want to bring this back. But again, I was a web developer. Like, what radio station is going to take a chance on a web developer creating, a show reminiscent of old time radio? And then podcast came out, and I was like, oh, great. Like, I can do this now without, having to convince anyone to give me any money or, space or time to do so. And, I sat on that idea for forever, waiting for the right time. Spoiler alert, there is no right time. You just have to decide to do it or don't. And so my son was, I guess, probably 7 years old. He was 7 years old. And I decided that, why not? Why not do it now? I could have done it, the entire time that I didn't have a child, and, like much easier times. But, I decided that if I was going to do it, I needed to just go ahead and do it and stop procrastinating, or else it was never going to get done. And so I just needed to land on a concept. Originally, what I wanted to do was a full cast drama horror, just like old time radio would be, but that's, incredibly expensive. And I knew that as my first little foray into this podcasting world, that was going to be really difficult for me to pull off. So I kind of found this happy medium of someone reading and, acting out the lines in a story, but it's essentially someone reading a story to you, but then putting the same sort of atmospheric music and sound effects that you would have in a movie or a old-time radio show behind the narration for the story. So I kind of found a compromise that allowed me to keep my costs down and still be able to do kind of what I wanted to do. And I did an Indiegogo campaign to sort of, because I worked in business, I was a web developer, but worked for a lot of startups. So they talk a lot about, minimum viable product and, all of this kind of stuff. And so I kind of applied all of that knowledge that I gained in my day job and applied it to the podcasting thing and said, well, let's see if people are even interested in what I have to do here. So that way, is this going to be a hobby that's going to sink a whole lot of my money? Or is this going to be something that I can actually at least break even on, or, maybe even make some money on? And so I had a successful fundraiser for my first season. And I was like, oh, well, people like this more than I thought that they would, because I had no audience, no platform before all of this started, but word spread. And I raised plenty of money for the first season. And by the time the first season was over, I had enough patrons to fund the second season. And it's just grown from there.
How about you, Landis?
Yeah. So did you hear the one about the lawyer that walked into a podcast studio? Sounds like a bad dad joke, but that's, I left a really lucrative career as a lawyer, wanted to do something more creative in my 60s. Is really kind of a challenge because I used to have to raise my hand for the IT department to help me change my password. And so I was curious, could I figure out how to do a podcast? I knew that in Charlotte, where I'm located, occasionally on the radio, somebody to interview an author. I didn't know that there was a podcast in Charlotte that was focusing on, local talent, regional talent. I felt like there was a sort of a gap there. And I like listening to authors read their work. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to do something I know nothing about. I'm going to go start a podcast and I'll learn something in the process. So, that's what we do. Charlotte Rose Podcast, where authors give voice to the written words. They come on, we talk about it. The thing that I did have, although I didn't have the technology side, which I've learned, I did have, given all the trials I had done as a civil trial lawyer, the experience of asking questions. And I think somebody mentioned, or we might talk about it. So I bring to the table this thing called direct examination, which is where the questioner gets out of the way and lets the witness in the case of court or the guest in the case of a podcast shine. And so I figured I could do that. Now, every now and then I have to cross-examine somebody, but hell, that's part of the fun, right? But, I just, like to get together and do that. And it's been fun. It's grown. It started small. It's gotten bigger. I'm 28 states and 4 countries and still featuring local authors. And we may talk about how you manage your time, but that's what we're doing. So it's fun.
So now that everybody's lost their mind, and Tonia, actually, ironically enough, the first thing I ever recorded was, and I did part of the narration and all the Foley work. We recorded the 3 witches from Macbeth when I was in, I think, 6th grade.
That's amazing.
So that's actually when I got started. And that was a very long time ago. Yes, it was not reel to reel, though there was one of those in the house too.
Still, that's better than what I had at school. We had a stage. There was no video. There was no audio recording. It was just a play. So I didn't have any experience with any of this stuff from in high school.
My high school, we were trying to play with some of that stuff, but we weren't cool. We did end up doing a really terrible rendition of Spaceballs, which was fun. But it was a lot of fun to do that. But I mean, we were limited with what we could do. But still,
it makes you creative when you have those limitations. I think it helps make you more creative, totally. And more scrappy.
And for the old radio show thing, that's actually one of those things I encourage newbie writers to do. Is listen to the old time radio
and look
shows.
Up the scripts. There's scripts still out there that you can read, and you can still listen to the show as you're reading the script. It's just it's the same advice they give screenwriters is download the script, watch the TV show or the movie, and see what they changed, see what they kept, and how to tell a story.
I think I had that itch too because with my new release, I had an idea I created a little script, and the narrator from my audiobook, basically on this episode that's going to come out in May, I interview 3 of the characters from my novel, and he plays the part of the characters, having been the narrator. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, you write a little script.
That sounds pretty cool.
You interview your characters. They get on me a little bit about, what I made them do in the book, and a couple of them are slow readers, so they're asking me what's happening, what's coming in the book, and that kind of thing. So we had a little fun with it, but kind of like a mini radio hour. But you just, so if you do your audiobook, get your narrator, create a little interview with your characters.
Yeah, it could be like a bonus episode or like a perk for someone who backed you on Kickstarter or something like that. Like, I'm actually going to write that down.
That's cool.
I actually did
Great
that
idea.
for one of my novel releases. I actually interviewed 2 of my main characters. They were one of them was a zombie mobster. The other one was the other one, no. So it was good. It was just like his word brains was the word dude or whatever, or Groot. It was hilarious. That was one of them, and then the other one was just like could translate for him. And so the person interviewing him was like, I don't know what's going on here. That's okay. We'll tell you. So it's just like it's an old school. It was like character interviews are some of the best ways to market. It's just my honest opinion.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
So Josh, now that you've got more than 2 or 3 shows under the belt, maybe 4 or 5, how do you approach a show now, and how different is that from when you were first getting started?
One of the biggest things that's happened with me is also like my show has evolved quite a bit. When it started, it was just an audio show, right? So now I've evolved. It's now a Twitch show. So it's a very different. So the first thing originally was a half hour to an hour. Now it's 1 to 2 hours is where I'm at now, because again, I'm a loquacious bastard. I have the ability to chat. But the other part of it too is because now it's a visual show. I think about it visually a lot more, right? Like that's one of the reasons why I do drink and draws with guests. This is one of the reasons I'm thinking about doing a live Magic the Gathering show. I have a visual medium to tell a compellingly different story than in just a standard interview. Now, don't get me wrong, I still do a lot of standard interviews, but because I have this luxury of a video concept, I'm like, okay, how can I bring out the best in the guest I have, right? Because again, some of them are illustrators, some of them are video game designers, some of them are, so why not play with that? And I've been thinking about that more and more and more as time has gone on. The core concept of the show has not changed, in the sense that, again, I tried to highlight the very best of whoever I'm talking to and give them a chance to be themselves. But I have more tools to do it now, and I'm aware of it a lot more now. So I'm trying to play with it consciously a lot more.
How about you, Marx?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, how do you approach getting ready for a show? How do you approach, working with guests? How do you really approach the show itself?
I'm thinking about my character interviews for my book.
Johnny Optics.
I once I find guests and schedule them, then I look them up. I learn more about them. I read other interviews about the guests to get some ideas of what they've already been asked before, so I'm not just rehashing stuff. And I try to find a good angle for it. So what I tend to be kind of I'll write a rough script that we follow, like for questions and stuff, and then pivot off of that based on what the conversation's going. And Julie's really great about just being really conversational, and I'm more like, oh, well, what about this thing you did and whatever date, time or something, and she's more like, hey, what do you think about rabbits? They're cool. So it's a nice mix with guests. It makes them hopefully feel comfortable. We've had some of them say they just feel like it's just having a conversation with some friends. So that's what we try to do, and that's kind of how I prep.
How about you, Tonia? Especially considering you guys are putting on, more production.
Yeah.
That's a way different way of having to prepare and what you're looking to do.
Yeah. So we have a submission form for authors to their story. So it works, very much the same way it would work for like a literary magazine or something like that, where author submits a story, we read it and decide, if we want to pass or if we want to do a revise and resubmit or accept it. The vast majority, just like any other literary publication, is pass on. But I think the thing that kind of sets us apart is that you can really good story that's great on the page, but will not work for audio because listeners have different ideas of how a story should work over audio versus on the page. So pacing is way more important in audio than it is on the page. So, you know, that's the reason that we reject most really good stories. Or if it's a really, really good story, we'll work with the author and say, like, look, this is a great story, but it needs a lot of work to make it work for audio. Are you willing to do that work, or you just want to send it somewhere else, kind of thing? And then once we get the story, we'll, you know, go through and edit it, not just for, you know, structure, pacing, the normal things you would edit for, but also just making sure that there aren't things that will stand out in audio more. Like most authors have a word that they repeat a lot. And so we have to, you know, coach them and say, you can't say the same word 17 times in a page. You know, like we got to come up with a different way to say some of these things because it's so much more noticeable on audio than it is on a page. Like you may not notice that they've repeated that word so many times on a page, but when you're hearing it, you're like, oh my God, this is getting on my nerves, and you want to turn it off. So yeah, then it goes through, you know, the editing process. After it goes through editing, we send it out to a narrator. I have a whole bank of narrators and I pick who I think would have a good voice for that particular story. Sometimes I'll include some direction notes on the story, but more often than not, I don't, because it's, you know, mostly just someone narrating a story. But every once in a while, there are pieces that I really need to put some direction in there to make sure that they're going to deliver a line in the way that I want. Get the narration back that goes off to my audio editor. Sometimes notes in there and say like, hey, it'd be really great to have like this sound effect here, but I've been working with my audio editors for so long that I don't really need to do that anymore. They kind of have a really good idea of what I expect. And then they'll send it to me for QA and I'll say, you know, hey, like, I'm not really happy about this music choice, or can we add this sound effect here? It's usually fairly minor edits, again, because I've been working with them for so long. They know what I want. Once it's QA'd, then I pay the author, I pay the narrator, I set the episode to go live. Oh, I have to record my intro and outro for every single one of them. You know, hi, I'm Tonia Ransom, blah, blah, blah. You know, make sure you join us on Patreon, buy our merch, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of every episode, I do a creepy fact, which I don't really like publicize a lot. Like I like to kind of see like how many people really want to listen to the end. Versus how many people like don't even know that the creepy fact is there. So every once in a while, like I'll mention a creepy fact on Twitter and people will be like, wait, you do what? Because most people don't listen to the very end. But at the very end of every episode, there is a creepy fact that's related to the episode in some way.
I have actually a question for you, but I'm just going to add something. I actually so at the very end of all my audio episodes, there is an elderly lady I used to work with that always goes, Josh, shush. I took it out because it's like I did it for like 150 episodes. The moment I took it out, I literally got mail. Why did you take that out? That's awesome.
That's great. You know, people were listening till the end.
No, it's just one of those like I find that when with podcasts, like the intro and the outro are almost always, if they're similar enough, people come to expect it. It's just one of those actual things. Yeah. They do. The question I did have though, like in terms of tone of your audios, because I haven't listened to your podcast, how much thought do you put into each? Like, do you have a good general idea of what the feel is, or does your audio engineering team come up with that tone?
I have a good idea. Want the feel would be to be like. I mean, it's usually pretty easy to figure out like what kind of tone the author is going with. So it's not necessarily me figuring out the tone for it. It's more like interpreting what I think the author would want as a tone. So it makes it really easy for me and my audio engineers to be on the same page. But there are some of them that, you know, I'll explicitly say because there's like a twist ending or something. And if they read through the story first, then they're going to select audio that is going to match whatever the reveal is at the end. And so I'll tell them, don't do that because, you know, at the beginning, like it's all sunshine and flowers or, you know, whatever the case may be, like it needs to feel that way until the audience gets to the point that it's like, oh no, something really bad. I mean, everybody knows something's bad, you know, bad is going to happen in a horror show, but, you know, they don't necessarily know what the bad thing is. So, you know, it kind of, you know, creates this, this sense of security that they know is not there, but it also helps to unsettle them a little bit because they're like, wait, this is not what I would expect to hear right now. And so they're waiting for that shoe to drop, for that music to change, for those sound effects to come in to let them know what it is that they actually need to be afraid of.
How about you, Landis?
Yeah,
How do you approach getting started?
So coming at it, having been a lawyer and sort of very, got to have a checklist before I go to court and got to have everything lined up. I created that. I created a website with a submission form like Tonia has. I'll look at the submissions. I've created the form so they can send me information about themselves, their photo, their book cover. And then once I decide I'm going to invite them to be on, they'll mail me the book, and then I read the book. And then also I've got a little checklist of things I do to prepare for the episode so that I don't turn into one of those podcasters that just shows up and says, "Tell me about your book." I want to make sure, that they know that I've read it, and I want to pick out things about the book that we want to talk about. And so we'll talk for 10 minutes or so, and then I also schedule ahead of time, a reading for them. And sometimes the authors pick good sections of the book to read. Sometimes, I have to help them a little bit, encourage them not to run away from the beginning, that inciting incident, because that's where you draw people in. And we usually have them read something from there. And then we'll talk a little bit about writing life at the end. And then when I'm editing the episode, I'm doing things while I'm listening, like creating some more graphics, posting to social media, scheduling to social media for when it's going to come out. And then when I finish the editing, I'll create an audiogram, a little clip, and add it to an image I've already created. And then I throw in a Patreon channel episode too. Sometimes it was longer in the beginning, but with all the shows I was recording, I've cut back to about a 10-minute episode where they talk about what they're reading, what they like to read, so that I can give the Patreon supporters some book recommendations and that kind of thing. So, it's pretty, I will say this too, being a lawyer, I have a guest agreement, and when they submit the form, they agree to comply with the terms of the guest agreement. I would encourage anybody getting into podcasting, it may sound like, that's not a very nice way to introduce yourself, to have them sign a legal document. But you'd be amazed sometimes when people come back and say, "Well, I didn't give you permission to edit that," or "I didn't give you permission to not, to use my photo," or, "I've listened to it. I don't really like that. I want you to take it down." Well, have a guest agreement that gives you a non-exclusive right to, the audio that waives any copyright concerns they may have, releases you, and gives you the right to put their photo up and edit it, and actually not even put it on if you don't want to.
I think that's super important too, because I hear so many horror stories, especially from, other creators of podcasts that do interviews where they talk about, like, I had an interview with somebody that I thought was going to be really great, but it turns out that the interview was terrible. All they did was, promote themselves the entire time without, actually answering any questions, or, like they, stumbled on words, or they were clearly distracted, something was wrong with it. And then, the person was mad that they, spent time, obviously, recording that episode. And then, they're being told that episode's not going to go up, and they were, counting on it for promotion. And, having something like a guest agreement that's like, we can talk about these things. It's not just promotion. We have to talk about these other things. These topics are off limits. Who has rights to say what goes in and what goes out.
Yeah. And I've
so important.
I've honed it too, to like one page. And because I have the authors read part of their book on the podcast, I have them agree that, I have the right to put that out in an audio form, but they retain their copyright in all forms to it, other than me having the permission to put it out in that form. And so I do think that it's valuable to do that. And you can build it easily into your submission process, so that originally when I was meeting them in the studio, I was having to hand them this thing across the table, and they'd look at me like, "Wait a minute, whatever." And so I just said, "Well, everybody signs it. Don't worry about it." And they said, "Wait a minute, you're a lawyer." Yeah. I said, well,
let me read this.
Never trust the lawyers.
Never trust a lawyer. Exactly.
Could have been anybody else but a lawyer. Like, no, I'm reading this like word for word twice.
Yeah, I encourage them. I encourage them to read it. And then, I think, people should learn to expect it. If all podcasters do it, then it'll become a thing, and it'll protect the podcast community. And frankly, it'll, ensure that whoever's coming on your podcast is taking the time to read your instructions. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah. I mean, I have agreements that my authors have to sign beforehand before we publish their stories. And, like there are some things that they don't like about it. Like I have a clause in there that's basically like I have the right to buy an option to make a TV episode out of their story, but it's in there for a very specific reason, because my manager and I are trying to shop our podcast, or my podcast, as a television series. And so studios want to see that they can actually take these stories and produce them in a TV format. And so, once I explain that, usually people are like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I'm not just like, grabby, like give me all the rights. I'm only asking for the rights that I actually need. And, most of them are non-exclusive rights. The only exclusive thing I ask for is audio. And that's only for 6 months. And then, I have the rights to continue to use the audio, forever for promotional purposes and, things like that.
Well, I'll just say, and I'll kick it over, but mine is available on my website if anybody wants to go look at it. And it was drafted by a lawyer, but I'm not giving legal advice. You can do with it what you will. So
I love that lawyer boilerplate right there.
I'll pass it on. I'll pass it on to Ian now.
All right, Ian. The attorney has passed to the defending counsel. So,
wow, awesome. No pressure at all. So yeah, I mean, we're a fairly structured show on Dudes in Hyperspace, and that's by design. We have sponsors. And every block of content that we produce in one show is more ad inventory, right? That's more real estate that we can then sell to further monetize the podcast. So we open with a quick banner segment. Then we have a 5 to 7 minute round robin called The News, which is where me and my two co-hosts kind of go around the horn with what we've got going on with our writing projects, because first and foremost, that's what we're there to do, is promote ourselves and hopefully sell a few books in the process. After that, we have a 30-minute topical segment, which is typically where we're going to have an interview if we have a guest. And then we have a halftime segment where we talk about our presenting sponsor. Then the back half is our listener mail segment, followed by a close called White Flag, which is where we talk about what we're looking forward to in the days and weeks ahead. We've got a couple of other segments that we toss in there from time to time if the need arises, like On the Stump, which is where, somebody has something they want to rant about, and they are officially given the gavel, Mr. Landis, and they get to rant unimpeded by the other guests or by the other hosts. It's their stump. We've got another one called 2-Minute Drill that we'll do for some of our guests, which is just a rapid fire succession of fun questions, everything from, pizza or burgers, or craft beer versus domestic beer, just really quick answer, quick hitter stuff that's just meant to be fun.
South Carolina barbecue versus Texas barbecue.
There you go.
Texas doesn't have barbecue.
Oh, you shut your mouth when you're talking to me. I did want to kind of backtrack for just a second, guys. And Landis said something earlier that if we've got people watching this who are considering doing this, I think is really a priceless piece of wisdom that I don't want to I don't want to brush over that. When he was talking about his podcast, Charlotte Reader's podcast, the first thing he said was, I looked around and I really saw a need for this type of show. We have a lot of writers in Charlotte, and I felt like this was a show that people really would want to hear. If you're thinking about starting a show, you got to ask yourself, why do people want it? Why do they need it? So what? You're great at interviewing authors. A lot of people are. What is going to make your show different? What is it about your content that people should want to come check out? What is the need, the niche you look to fill? In our instance, me and my two co-hosts predominantly write military sci-fi, space opera, although in Rob's case, he's a big fantasy guy, and so he writes a lot of that kind of stuff. But inevitably, when we show up at cons and meet with readers, we're all wearing sports ball caps. Rob is almost always in a Rush t-shirt because he's a music nut. So am I. I mean, heck, I'm wearing a Joe Bonamassa hat as we speak. We kind of exude these things in our personalities just because of who we are. Readers start to pick up on that. And in addition to wanting to come over and talk to us about, okay, well, what's going on with the next Mako book, or what's going on with the next, Swamp Eagle book, they want to talk to us about, okay, well, Florida State's been pretty down in the ACC the last couple of years. What do you think about your Noles? Are they going to do anything? Or, oh, did you see Bonamassa live? That guy's awesome. And we figured out real quick, there's an audience out there of people, mostly guys, who want to talk about beer and grilling and sports and music, in addition to getting more content about their favorite authors and their favorite books. And so that was kind of when we zoned in on, that's our niche. That's our crowd. They're our people. We want to go talk to those people. And so we built the entire show to meet that need. I say all that to say, from a content standpoint, it gives us a lot of real estate to work with. So we interview a lot of authors. It's mainly word of mouth. We don't go out looking for authors. Typically they'll come to us because they've got a new release or something going on, and they want to kind of work us into their launch schedule. We just had Casey Azell of Bain Books a couple of episodes back. She was on. Craig Martell of International Association of Science Fiction and Fantasy Authors. They sponsor our Podmail segment. He was on a while back talking about, their association. But then we also had a pro on talking about the USFL that's about to start up. Our next episode is going to be a Masters preview with Cam Rogers from CNN and CBS Sports. We interviewed a brewmaster a while back to talk about craft beer and what they do. Still waiting on a pit master for barbecue, but we're working on it. My latest project is I'm trying to nail somebody down to come in and talk about the Indianapolis 500 in May. So that makes it very easy for us to kind of nail down what we want to talk about, because between launch schedules for books and sports schedules, there's never any lack of things to talk about. And so we take that, we slot it into the structure that we have built for a given episode of the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast, and away we go.
Actually, like to go one step further. What he's saying, the other big key is make sure it's something you're passionate about talking about, because the big thing, the real thing is, all of what says is true. We all have different niches we bring. Like even though I'm in an interview show, I generally don't ask questions. Like, we just have a real conversation about wherever the hell we're gonna go, right? But the thing about it is, you have to love what you're doing, because especially at the beginning, you're not going to have an audience. So you better love what you're doing, or why are you doing it, right? So I find like the first 10 episodes is a good litmus test, because that's when you're like, do I have enough to talk about to go beyond that, right? Because everybody can usually come up with a good 2, 3, 4, 5 episodes, and it's like, yeah, these are great. Then it's like, then what? I don't know. And that's a very common thing. You'll see a podcast fizzle out sometimes around 10, 20 episodes because they're out of stuff to talk about.
Or they realize that they just hate doing it.
That's the other thing, right? And that's totally legit.
Yeah.
It's totally legit, right? So I always say this, like when I tell people like how to start a podcast, the very first thing I tell them is, how long do you want your show to be? Because that might seem like that is probably the quintessential key to your structure. Doesn't matter what show it is. How long is it? And can you fill that time with stuff you care about? If you can do a good show. If you can't, then either go shorter or don't do it.
Right. And I also recommend, even though I didn't do this, I recommend, having several episodes, recorded, edited, everything ready to go before you launch, because then it also gives you a chance to decide, do I hate this? So you can decide to not launch it at all, or, go ahead and put it up, but then say it's a limited series so people aren't nagging you if they decide that, they want to hear more from you. Done that just for my own sanity, because trying to keep up with episodes before they were due, like, it really burned me out a lot in the beginning, because I didn't have any help. It was just me in the beginning. And, when it's just you are, in my case, like, I am the, reader for the stories. I'm the editor for the stories. I'm the sound editor. I am the producer. I am the social media person, a lot of different hats that you have to wear. And it's a lot of work. And if you don't have a whole bunch of episodes ready to go, you're just going to stress yourself out.
For every 1 hour episode of the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast that you get, you can bet I put in somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from 6 to 10 hours of work in order to make that 1 hour program work, from prep work to show note writing, to promotion, to the audio editing and the mixing process, to actually recording the session. It's a number of hours just to get that 1 hour that then drops on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Right. For fiction, we're at about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes an episode. And it takes, I would say, probably 15 to 20 hours for each episode.
Yeah, and I would
across
add,
the board, not just me.
to pick up on what Tonia said, I've actually, because I've got a book release April 5th, I actually pre-recorded my weekly episodes for April, May, and June so that I could be sort of podcast free for the next 3 months. And I think it's going to allow me, having put so many episodes out in this 3-year period, to kind of take a breath and listen to what y'all are doing. And I think it's important also to get ideas from other people. I think it's important to evolve, to make changes to keep it fresh, because I've changed the podcast over time, and I'll probably change some things after the 300th, but it's a good idea to get a little breather. They say be on time, be there when they can expect you, or tell them when you're going to be there, and then show up. Well, one way you can do that is do some things in advance, and then you can show up without even being there.
Right. I'm terrible about that. I am late on so many episodes when, like my grandmother died in February. So I was like late on the episode after that. And then of course, my production schedule was all messed up. So then the episode after that was late, but it was all because I didn't do all of my stuff beforehand. Like I planned on doing. One of these days I'll take my own advice. Yeah.
Batching is your friend. I mean, that's so, let's take this from the other side. For you guys, when you look at bringing on a guest, bringing somebody on, whether they're coming on to talk about a book, or Tonia, like if they're coming on because you're buying their script, what are the things that you want to see that make for a good guest, that create that good contributor? What are the things that it benefits you, it benefits the show, but ultimately it also benefits them as well? I mean, how do you really make that so it's beneficial to everybody in the process? So Marx, how about you guys?
So I try to find guests. So our niche, I guess, is that they're either creators who are sci-fi fantasy type creators. They don't do somebody does a mystery cozy or something. And then, or there's someone who's come up with a book or something that helps creators create, like filmmakers or something like that. So approaching it from that angle, we try to structure it like in the beginning. We get more personal, like about how they started their journey and getting to know the person, I guess, at first, and then a little bit about their projects from like a fan perspective would be interested in, and then usually most people we shift maybe earlier for some, depending upon why they're there, into craft, like tips, filmmaking tips or author tips. So that way we know our audience they're either going to be enjoy it because they're a fan of that person, or or on the back end of it, they're going to enjoy it because they're going to learn tips to help them out as a creator too. That's what we kind of try to structure that way. And we try to make conversation, hopefully somewhat fun to listen to. Once a blue moon, we throw something crazy in. Like we did a sci-fi fantasy trivia game one time with guests, so that was fun. Threw in like audience clapping and everything else in there.
That's awesome. I love it.
How about you, Tonia? Do you guys look to how much do you guys push them to help promote the shows that they're on as well?
Yeah, well, I actually started off doing interviews with some of the authors. I've since cut that out just because I looked at the stats for the podcast to see how many listeners per episode, and I got half the listenership for my interview episodes. People love them. They talk about them a lot. A lot of people were sad when I said that I wasn't going to do it anymore. But it was costing me money, and I said I can bring you more stories, but I have to cut out the interviews first so that I can do that. And they were like, "Oh, okay." So at first it was very much similar to Marx's method there, introducing themselves and just asking them for recommendations on what they like to read, what was their inspiration for the story, so that people could glean some writing tips from it. At this point it's just since we're not doing the interviews anymore, I send them an email every time an episode goes live. I send them an email saying, "Hey, your story is live. Here's the link to it. Here is the tweet, or social media text of what I'm sending out, and the episode graphic that you can attach to it." So they can and I tag them in it too, because one of the things that I ask in my author submission form is what are their social media handles. So if they include handles for, various platforms, I'll tag them on it. So they can just easily retweet it if they want, or they can post it on their own because I give them everything they need to do it. All they have to do is, open it up on their phone and copy paste what I have, change what they don't like, and, drop the graphic in. So I try to make it as easy as possible so that they promote it because, a lot of times, obviously they want to promote their stuff, as well. So it's not very hard to convince them usually to promote their stories.
How about you, Landis?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question first, the promotion side. I found that to be very interesting over time because I do like Tonia. I'll when I finish recording, I'll send them an email that's got a lot of information about when it's going to release and how all our channels and how they can help us by sharing and that kind of thing. And the day it comes out, I'll send them a link that takes them to the website where they can listen. It's also on all the podcast channels, but I tell them, hey, here's what you can use to go promote your episode. And I give them a couple of graphics and an audiogram. And, bigger is not always better when it comes to getting someone to help you promote your episodes because those big authors, they're on 20, 30, 40, 50 shows sometimes. So I've had some big authors on, but they don't tend to promote my show the way that, sort of the middle grade, still good authors, but they're more likely to promote it than others. And, you can't always tell when you're getting someone on the show, but I tend to look at do they have a website? Do they have social media channels? Are they active on social media? That'll tell me a little bit about whether they're willing to help promote the show. And I think that's important because otherwise, basically we're just doing all the work for them to get the word out. Mm-hmm. In terms of interesting, that's one thing that's interesting to me, that authors are actually stepping up and promoting themselves and doing what needs to be done. But two things really, if they have an interesting story in their book and they have an interesting story about themselves that may or may not relate to the book, that's two good pieces of content to talk about in a 30 to 35-minute show. So that's kind of what I look at. And I'm I might not be drawn to the book, but I'm drawn to the story of the person. And I say, well, if this person has done this, maybe their book is pretty good even before I read it. So I look for those two things: interesting story in the book and interesting story in the author.
How about you, Ian?
Actually, quick question for the panel. Where does everybody see that they get the most traction on the regular for social media networks? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Where does everybody get the most mileage?
That varies with me.
Yeah,
we'll get to me. We'll get to me when it's my turn because I have very different criteria, I think, than everybody else does at this point. So,
all right, just curious for my own sake. As far as let's see here, as far as promotion goes, I mean, listen, it doesn't get any easier than tagging people in a social media post and saying, please share this. They don't have to do anything except for click a share button, and particularly on a platform like Twitter. I mean, good grief, that's not even 3 seconds of your time, I do think it is important, though, that you take the time to craft some good looking stuff. So, everybody here so far has mentioned show graphics. Make one, learn how to use the freebie version of Adobe Spark or Canva, whatever it is, put your show logo on there, make it look good, make it look sharp, make it look something that is eye catching that people will actually want to share. And then take the time to go out if you're not going to be as thorough as Landis and get that on or I guess it was Tonia with your submission form where you have all that in advance. I go out and I find that. We do most of our promotions on Facebook and Twitter. So I go out and I find their handles on those spaces and I make sure I integrate that into, to my promotional content. As far as what I look for in a guest, kind of a lot of what these guys have said so far. I want somebody that's interesting. Particularly when you're dealing with authors, they do a lot of these. Okay. They're going to be asked a lot of the same questions. They're pretty well ready to roll. I like to go find some other interviews that maybe they've done in the past and see how they perform. Are they entertaining? Are they engaging to speak with? Or do they just kind of like mumble around a little bit and talk about their stories? Because I don't want that on my show. Like I want somebody who's we pride ourselves on being a bit irreverent and a little bit more loose and casual and fun. And I want somebody who can come on to my show and roll with that. It's not just another author interview. We're going to josh you around a little bit and try and have fun for the audience. And so I need somebody who can be able to hang with that energy. So there is that. Again, kind of like what Landis was talking about. Do they have a good story to tell? What do they have to say whenever they come on the air, and how are readers, listeners going to respond to that? That factors into whether or not they get a slot on our show. If it's somebody who's an expert in sports, typically that makes things a lot easier because they're polished. They're ready to go. All right. So, Cam, who's coming on to talk the Masters with me next week. Again, CNN, CBS Sports, he knows what he's doing. He's a professional journalist. These are the people that we go out and get. Joe DeLeon from NFL Prospects Podcast, Bob Sturm from, The Ticket in Dallas. He's on every afternoon drive on sports radio in Dallas. These are people who know how to come on and sound good. And that's important to me. That determines who I bring on the show.
Josh, how about you?
So I am, and this might be to my arrogance to some degree, but I truly believe I can get a good interview out of absolutely anybody. I've been interviewing people for 20 years. And so what happens is you get very good at listening to what people say, and more interestingly, what they don't. So one of the things about my show that I really pride, I've had people like Kelly Armstrong, Spider Robinson, I've had people like Robert Sawyer, but I've also had people just getting started out. And the thing is, one of the reasons I kind of go with that route is I want to create the feeling that anybody can be here. And that's by design. That is legitimately by design. And I can have a quiet person and I can get a conversation out of them. I can have a loud, obnoxious person, Dr. Jim. He'll tell you that firsthand, right? And we can
I showed up.
Yeah. So we can have a conversation about anything. The real trick to a good interview, first off, two things: eliminate all questions. One of the things I had actually an interview years and years ago where he was such an entertaining person, I just threw out all the questions. And every interview I try to avoid questions until the very end when I want you to promote whatever it is you're going to promote. Really good interviews don't need questions. And once I realized that, it changed my whole perspective on getting an interview. The real trick with any guest, doesn't matter who it is figure out what can break their ice. Once you break their ice, you're in and you can get a conversation with anybody. It doesn't matter who it is. But that does take a lot of practice and a lot of skill. Consequently, I don't do a lot of prep work anymore because I am that guy that can go, I can get an interview out of you. I don't care. We'll figure it out. Right. And that's just where I am in the interview process. So for me, a guest is literally can be anybody. Now, what I tend to look for though is you're doing something with yourself. It doesn't matter what it is, whether you're writing a book, releasing an album, whether you're putting a comic book out there, whether you're doing a Kickstarter, I don't care. Put something out because that'll give me a place to start. And then from there, we'll go wherever it is we're going to go. I've had people I've had a 10-year-old that released their first book and for charity, which was really cool. I've had, like I said, I had Spider Robinson talking about his dinner in the White House, which is a completely different conversation. And it all fits within the theme of what I do. So for me, the guest doesn't really, in one sense, the guest doesn't matter in terms of who they are. It's important that they are just who they are. As far as promotion goes, there's another aspect that no one here has talked about, and that's this: momentum. I do anywhere from 4 to 5 shows a week. This is just what I do. What I have noticed with me is because I am so regular with my show, my numbers have been going up steadily since I've started, and then this has been happening since I started on Twitch. And what has happened is, I scored my first 2,000 downloads in a week last week. Now, it may not be as big as some of your numbers, and that's cool. But when I started where I'm at, the growth has been tremendous. There's a momentum aspect to what you do as well. If you're doing shows on a regular basis, people notice, right? Even if your authors, even if the people you are with are the absolute pathetic, and to go with Landis's point, yeah, the more famous people, they're the ones that are terrible at it. They are actually usually the absolute worst at it. But even so, what inevitably happens, I find, is if you do enough episodes and it's on a concerted, regular basis, what happens is someone discovers you and goes, "Oh, this is cool," and they tell their friends. And I can literally look at that. I can literally look at my weeks on the show. I can tell it's like somebody to spread the word. I can literally tell what those weeks are. And that's a big part of it. The most consistent way to promote is just doing a good show. And if you just do that, people notice.
And also think about where, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Also think about, like, for me, horror. So like October is a huge month. I look to get a lot of press coverage in October because people are looking for my kind of podcast during that time. So, if you have something that's timely, if you have, an author that's got a book coming out, you tie it to that to try to get, people to write, at least, mention you in, a blog post that is about this author releasing their book or, movie or, whatever the case may be. Like, just sort of, piggyback on whatever is going on in the world at that time, as long as it's not something bad. Like, don't take like the war in Ukraine and, unless your podcast is about that, and use that, it needs to be relevant to your podcast, but pay attention to, anniversaries that are coming up, big things that are coming up, because then you can tie that into your podcast and get press from that.
I just wanted to add interesting statistic. So when I was doing 2 episodes a week, I thought I would get more downloads. The beginning of this year, when I started doing just 1 a week, my downloads went up per week. So by that math, if I cut back to 2 a month, and then they'll go up even more. I don't know I really can't explain it, except that maybe sometimes with so much content out there, you've got to decide how much you're going to put out. And you might be just as fine to put it out once a week or every 2 weeks, or maybe in seasons and separate it by a month or 2. I think I thought in the beginning that, I just need to be putting out more episodes and I'll get more people listening, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I'd be curious what y'all think about that.
Well, no, go ahead, Josh.
It's the contract you make with your audience. That's what it comes down to. If you regularly do a 1 episode a week deal, right, then that's what the audience is going to come to expect quickly, right? Going back means probably very likely you're going to lose your audience. Going more, there's a risk that you might overexpose your product. There is that risk. What I found, so I went from 1, and then for me, this is just the growth with my show. I had no problem getting interviews. In fact, I got more interviews than I had airtime. So I had to actually go to 2 shows to do that. And then when COVID hit, the pandemic hit, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I went to 3 episodes because there was a reading episode. Like, I did a very C.S. Lewis thing. And then when I went to Twitch, I went to 4, and then it's now at 5. This was not a master plan. It just evolved that way. And what I found was that this is just what I found with me. Initially, it spikes, then it drops, but then it gets bigger, then drops again, then bigger and drops again, then bigger, then drops again. But that's the contract I have with my show. Whereas, again, if you made a decision, okay, we're going to do a seasonal podcast, and you set that up in advance, your audience will probably stick with you, because, again, there's lots of audiences for seasonal podcasts. Once a week, same thing. Once every 2 weeks, once a month, same thing, right? I can imagine, like, Tonia puts in, like, the amount of hours she puts in is probably 2 a month, maybe.
Yeah, I'm doing 2 a month.
2 a month. Mm-hmm. But that is perfect for her show, and that's again, she's kept a contract with her audience.
Right. It's going to go to weekly, but one of the things that I say at the beginning of every single episode is that if you want stories every single week, you have got to become a patron, because that's the only way that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that drives a whole lot of supporters, because they do want stories every week, but I don't have money but to do that. But yeah, that's the eventual goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get there, and they know that that's the contract, like you're saying.
Yeah. Every show has it. It doesn't matter what it is. You have a contract. You make that by just showing up and doing your thing. And I'll give this to somebody else in just a second. But that's what it comes down to. If you can keep your word with your audience, whatever that word is, whether it's written or unwritten, people will support you. The moment you break that, that's when you lose them.
But you can break it, but acknowledge it, because that's one thing that I've done is say, like, hey, like, because I was in the middle of a divorce. And so, I put out, on social media and, everywhere. I didn't create like an actual episode, but pretty much everywhere where people might follow me, I said, like, hey, I'm going through a divorce. Like, we're going to take a hiatus for a couple of months. I'm not exactly sure when we're going to be back, but I promise you we're going to come back. And got so much support from people, who were saying, take care of yourself, don't worry about us. We'll be here when you get back. And I lost 3 patrons, and 2 of them, because, it happened around early 2020, late 2019. 2 of them that I lost them because they just couldn't afford to keep being patrons. I only lost 1 person who I don't know why they left. Like, it could have been the same reason, or it could have been something else. Like, I didn't lose anybody as far as I know, because I stopped producing episodes for 4 months, which is insane. Like, I'm still like blown away by that, and so thankful for my supporters, because I think that's amazing for them to keep giving me money not to do anything essentially for 4 months, because they believe in what I'm doing so much that they were willing to stick with it.
Guys, we're just scratching the surface of podcasting, but we've been going for a little better than an hour. And I know it's an amazing thing that you put a bunch of people on that all like to talk, because there's no better reason to have a podcast than I'll show up and talk, other than I'll just show up and talk anyway. And then occasionally somebody hits a record button. But I want to thank everybody for coming to hang out tonight. But before we get out of here and we start talking about doing a round 2, I want to make sure everybody knows where to find these shows: website, social media, all the cool stuff. And we're going to work backwards because, nobody ever said I was right. So Landis, how about you?
Yeah, so it's charlottereaderspodcast.com. We're wherever you like to get your podcast. On Instagram, we're Charlotte Readers Podcast. I think Twitter's at Charlotte Reader. We're on Facebook with Charlotte Readers Podcast. I am excited about the fact that we're approaching 300 episodes and looking forward to continuing this journey. I am also excited about the fact that I've got a novel coming out. You can find out about that at landiswade.com. The ebook's out, the audiobook's out, the print book comes out April 5th. So yeah, I'm excited.
How about you, Tonia?
You can find Nightlight on Twitter. You can listen to it everywhere, but you can find it on Twitter at Nightlight Pod. Instagram is at Nightlight Pod. Facebook is Nightlight Podcast. You can find me personally on Twitter and Instagram at Mystifying, MISSDEFYING. You can find Risen as an ebook on Amazon. My print book is coming out sometime in May. Fingers crossed about that. Website ToniaRansom.com to stay up to date on anything that I'm working on.
Marx?
Yeah, you can find Genretainment at genretainment.com, and of course your favorite podcast feed. And you also can find Genretainment and anything else I'm doing creatively on marxpyle.com. And feel free to tweet at me over on Twitter at Mr. Marx.
Josh?
You can find Just Joshing Podcast on 2 channels, jpintoleresco.podomatic.com, or anywhere your favorite podcast to be listened to. Or you can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/justjoshingpodcast, if you want to listen to it. My website is jpintoleresco.wordpress.com if you want to see everything else I'm up to.
And Ian?
Dudes in Hyperspace Podcast. We're pretty well where all the places where podcasts are. So Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, TuneIn, all those good places. If you want to listen to us online, you can do that too at the Believe Podcast Network. So that's BLEAV. We joined them, I guess, about 5 weeks ago. So speaking of how often to publish, they were very clear. We're going to need you to be at least bi-weekly, if not weekly. So that's kind of where we are and where we hang out. If you want to follow us on social media, follow Shark Flight Media on Facebook and Twitter. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Go to my website if you want to know more about my books, ianjmalone.net. And come find me, man.
Well, I've had the great pleasure of hanging out with a lot of fellow video podcasters. And as we've been doing a lot of talking tonight, I am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we are coming up on 2 years and 600 shows. So we will see everybody here really soon. And have a good evening. Go start that show. Or don't. Get your sanity back. Night, everybody.
Night.